Invited all of the other participating countries. And over the course of yesterday, that Council of Ministers made some groundbreaking decisions. It will now be conveyed to heads of state at the Assembly of the African Union. The most significant of it is we've bedded down key rules of origin that allows us now to say with confidence to heads of state that we have a package of products that we can start trading on. Just to recall, in 2019, when the heads of state met, we had already done considerable work. And at the time, we had agreed to something of the order of just over 3,800 products for which there were rules of origin. But there were still a number of ones that had not been agreed. So over the last 2 years, the negotiators and the ministers have been meeting frequently. As you can see, 8 meetings of ministers. And it's concluded now with a package that has 88% of all products on the tariff books across the continent for which we have agreed rules of origin. In other words, we now have defined for each of them what constitutes the minimum African content for that product to be traded between countries on the continent on the basis of preferences. That is a big breakthrough. And I'm happy to say that this 2-year period of work that we've undertaken in 2020 and 2021 identified more than 850 additional products. 850 additional products for which rules of origin have been agreed. This package now goes to heads of state, and if they endorse it, that package becomes the basis for trade to commence. We also agreed to a range of other areas, and the Secretary General will no doubt unpack that shortly for us. But they included a process to bed down the completion of negotiation on trade in services. Services generate a vast volume of economic value add, GDP, across the continent. Today's meeting would not be possible without the services sector. Everyone in the media are in the communication sector. All of the facilities that I've used to come to this beautiful part of the African continent were the transport and logistics services. And the money that was paid for my flight are the finance services. And the food that I've eaten here have been procured from retailers and wholesalers that represent services. And so we want to fast track those negotiations, that we create large African markets, that we have African champions emerging in each of these sectors able to take matters forward. For ordinary citizens on our continent, it means more jobs, more economic opportunity, and Africa's moment to say we want to industrialize, that we can't be simply the generators of raw material for the workplaces, the factories of Asia, Europe, and the Americas. That Africa's moment for industrialization is here and is now, and this package will take forward that industrialization initiative. We've also had very substantial discussion on matters like investment protocols, competition protocols, and the matters relating to intellectual property. And these are the next phase of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we've given some guidance to our negotiators of where they need to go on these areas. And yesterday we also concluded and adopted important modalities on dispute settlement processes, how to deal with day-to-day challenges that comes up in trading relationships between countries and between companies that use our trading regimes. So that package of issues now constitute, we think, a sufficient technical and policy basis for heads of state to consider the package. And if that package is approved at the African Union Summit, the Assembly meeting that will be held in Addis Ababa in a few days' time, really, we will be able to then commence real trade. And so I want to conclude by saying that we've had a packed meeting of both ministers and senior officials yesterday. Of course, we maintained good social distancing protocols, and people were wearing masks except when they were speaking. But at the same time, it was an opportunity for trade ministers to shape the agenda. A lot of the technical work has been done by the Secretariat, and I want to really recognize the exceptional work of the Secretary General and a really capable, hard-working team of officials. And they're all based here in Accra. So Accra provides the home for the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So Secretary General, it's really just a few opening remarks on the significance and importance of this. So to conclude, until we got to this stage, we had the legal modalities ready, but we were not able to meet the thresholds of sufficient trade that we can undertake. That threshold has now been met in negotiation, and the big step has been countries and customs unions, ECOWAS for example, are now submitting, and many of them have submitted their offers saying these are the products from the agreed rules of origin that we can now commence trading on. And so I hope that this will boost African jobs and African industrialization. Thank you, Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister and Chairperson of the Council of Ministers responsible for trade. Maybe just to complement the comprehensive presentation by the Honorable Minister, there was also a discussion by the ministers on the tools that are required to implement the AfCFTA and to make it relevant to the business community, to entrepreneurs. It is very important that this agreement becomes an agreement that creates opportunities for them. You will know that on the 13th of January, here in Accra, we launched the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, which will enable us to now start trading amongst ourselves as African countries using a local currency rather than a third currency. We have 42 currencies in Africa. The cost of currency convertibility, according to our studies, is in excess of $5 billion a year. And this is not only a monetary cost, but there's also a cost of lack of competitiveness, constraint in terms of being competitive, access to affordable exchange facilities, currency exchange facilities, lack of affordability for small medium enterprises who want to trade across borders and across regions. So now with the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, which was recognized by the ministers yesterday as a tool of implementation, we now will be able as Africans to trade using local currency. You will be, when you switch onto the platform, you will be able to trade with somebody in Kenya. You will trade using Ghanaian cedi. They will trade using Kenyan shillings. And we're very grateful to AfriximBank for designing and putting forward the technology as well as the liquidity that is required for the settlements to happen. We believe that this is a very important tool for boosting intra-Africa trade, and we believe that it will make a very, very positive difference, particularly for small medium enterprises for whom the cost of currency convertibility is a significant barrier to their competitiveness, as well as their ability to access new markets across the African continent. The other tool that the ministers discussed, which is also important for implementation of this agreement, is the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. And the Adjustment Fund is intended for those countries who in the short term will experience revenue losses as a result of reducing or eliminating their tariffs. We are not at a point where in Africa we use tariffs as or duties as a tool for industrial development, which I hope is where we will be in a few years' time. For many of our countries, tariffs are still a tool for revenue generation. And so over time, we want to change that and use tariffs for, as the minister was saying. But of course, we are not there yet. And so in the short term, we have to find other mechanisms. And this adjustment fund is intended for that purpose. It is an initial amount of $1 billion that has been made available for this purpose by AfCFTA. Our studies indicate that we will need between $6 to $7 billion to plug this gap that will be created by revenue losses in the short term. And so I'm very grateful to our strategic partner, AfCFTA, that they have made this facility available. We will also embark on a resource and financing mobilization drive to ensure that the fund itself is properly financed over the next 5 to 10 years. It will be operational as soon as next month. We intend to sign the agreement with AfCFTA as soon as the 8th of February. We want to make sure that we move quickly so that countries are able to access this $1 billion fund, of course, under and subject to certain criteria. The last tool of implementation that I would share with you, colleagues, is the Automobile Fund, a fund of about $1.2 billion, which again AfCFTA has made available to assist countries who want to participate in the automobile value chain, whether it is components, whether it is assembly of the vehicles. We see the automotive sector as a very strong driver for Africa's industrialization, as well as an opportunity for inclusivity, because all countries will have an opportunity to participate in the value chain, whether we are talking about minerals, copper, rubber, various minerals that are required to manufacture a vehicle, and most African countries have them. And so we want to make sure that there is a space for countries that have minerals, natural resources that are critical to manufacturing a vehicle, that there is a broad-based, inclusive value chain. What we learned yesterday is that Africa has, in the next 10 to 15 years, will require to manufacture between 4 and 4.5 million vehicles. If you look at the population of India and the population of Africa, similarly situated, India produces, according to the studies that were presented to us yesterday, 5 million units of cars per year as we speak. We are at a significant lower amount than India, and so we have to fill this deficit. And we believe that beyond South Africa and Morocco, the traditional, already industrialized manufacturers of vehicles, that there is a space for other countries to be part of the value chain. And so this automobile fund is intended specifically to make sure that in Zambia, for example, if they have an interest in processing copper to be part of the automotive's value chain, that the opportunity for them to do so is provided. In Liberia, if they want to process and make rubber and process it into tires, that there is an opportunity for them to do that. So this is, these are some of the tools that were discussed by the ministers yesterday, and I'm very happy that we are now moving, as the Honorable Minister was saying, we are now moving not only to commercially meaningful implementation, but we're also looking at tools that are required to ensure broad-based, across the continent, benefits for all African countries who are part of this agreement. The last point I would make is in respect of value chains. We identified 4 areas, priority areas: automotive sector, as I've just said, pharmaceuticals, transport and logistics, and agriculture and agro-processing as priority sectors that most African countries have an opportunity to exploit. So we had a very, very successful meeting here in Accra, and again we are grateful to the government and the people of Ghana for hosting the Secretariat and for hosting the meetings that continue to be convened here in Accra. The next phase for us will be to develop a what we call a tariff book, which will provide Africans, traders, exporters, which will provide them with a very, very clear, if you are exporting a particular product, as the Honorable Minister was saying, you will now be able to get onto our website once we've published this tariff book, and you will know with certainty what local content rules apply to your product, the procedures for exporting the product, what rules you have to abide with, sanitary and phytosanitary rules. All of this information will be provided so that traders can benefit from this agreement. Once again, thank you very much for coming today, and we are now in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you both. They always say it's always better when your bosses have spoken first, because you also feel a bit relaxed. So I'm now in my element, and I know very well that colleagues are excited to be asking questions, as we spoke earlier. But as we indicated, colleagues, please raise your hand. I know the colleagues with cameras are shielding us a bit, so if you are as tall as I am, it might be difficult for me to see you. So if you can stand up if I can't identify your hand, and then please, as indicated, come to the podium. As my former boss used to say, Mr. Ronnie Mamwepa, we're asking you not to give us a sermon or a speech, because there won't be any hymns that goes with your sermon. But a straight question would really, really be appreciated, and I'm sure that both the Minister and His Excellency will be able to answer. So I'm gonna take first 3 questions. Please raise your hands and identify yourself so that we can then ask you to come to the podium. Do I see any hands? Any questions, colleagues? Okay, gentleman there. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Nabil Ahmed Rufai. I report for SABC and CGTN, China Global Television Network. Basically, you talked about tariffs that have been agreed on, and quite recently, the Accra president of the Association of Ghana Industry complained about some of their members trying to trade in South Africa, and when they get to the ports, they get a lot of issues because it appears the information has not gone down well with those at the ports in terms of some of these tariffs that are supposed to be working at the moment. I want to find out from you what kind of engagements are going on so that those at the ports are in line with whatever the AfCFTA is trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another hand, colleagues. We'll take 3 questions. Any other hand? It was all clear. Okay, I'm going to allow His Excellency and the Minister to answer that one.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I will answer from the perspective of the Secretariat. Well, the first thing that is required is to have the legal instrument that will enable the customs authorities to apply the reduced duty. And one of the areas that we've been working very hard on is to produce that legal instrument. And now that we have 87.7% of rules of origins agreed to, we are now in a position for that legal instrument to have it gazetted at national level. So countries are now in a position to apply the rules of origin that we have agreed to apply them from a customs point of view. And so I expect that these matters that you have raised with this legal instrument, we call it the Ministerial Directive on the Start of Trading, that it will now enable customs authorities across the African continent to apply the rules and the duties that will be agreed to in the AfCFTA. This requires that we work very closely with customs authorities. And yesterday, the heads of customs authorities of Africa presented their state of readiness to the ministers of trade. And they talked in detail about what is required, what they require as customs authorities to make sure that commercially meaningful trading does happen. The ministers of trade and the AfCFTA Secretariat will rely exclusively on customs authorities to make sure that the duties that will be agreed to for reduction, the tariffs that are agreed to for reduction, as well as the rules of origin, that all of these things are codified into national law, that they are gazetted into national law, that they become part of the domestic customs infrastructure of every country. This is what we require to make sure that that trade is happening. I would say that it's going to take time. We should expect that it will take time for countries to adjust their customs systems. And this has been the case across the world when there is a new trade regime, a new trade agreement, a new tariff structure. It takes time for customs authorities to get their systems up and running so that the new agreement is implemented. Thank you.
Okay, I see a hand, but, oh, sorry. I'm going to allow the Minister to also respond.
Well, thank you very much. I think the Secretary General has dealt with the matter very, very adequately at a technical level. I want to stand back and just draw what is the policy objective that we're seeking to achieve. For the AfCFTA to realize its ambition, Africa needs to trade more with itself. So practically what that means is South Africa needs to increase the volume of imports from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Kenya, from Egypt, and we need to increase the volume of our exports to Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, and so on. That's the logic of the free trade area. So when Ghanaian exporters successfully sell in the South African market, for us it's an index of the success of the continental free trade area. So that's the overall approach that we take as trade ministers across the continent. Now, in order for the trade preferences to be kicked in, there are a number of technical and legal regimes that we need to put in place. We've done one very significant thing in December 2020, when the heads of state met virtually under the presidency of His Excellency President Ramaphosa and switched on what was called the implementation phase now of the AfCFTA. So from January 2021, that's exactly a year ago, the formal policy regime is in place that permits trade to take place on a preferential basis. However, in order to practically trade, we now need to have rules for every product. Those rules need to have been agreed, and those rules would then be implemented at ports of entry. Yesterday's meeting was the completion of that project. 88% of all the tariff lines on our tariff books. The tariff book is basically the document used at ports of entry. Everything that you can touch and you can feel would have a tariff line, whether it's gold or whether it is masks or microphones or cassava. Everything has its own unique tariff heading. And that work has now been completed. That work goes to the assembly, and if it's endorsed there by heads of state, that becomes the basis then for now the legal implementation of the trade agreement. Customs authorities are then obliged to implement that. They have to do so. They've been very cooperative across the continent, but their job would then be to give effect to those legal treaties. And that's where we are now. So the trade that has taken place to date have not yet had that legal foundation in place. So we still want to encourage that trade. In fact, South Africa sells products to Ghana, South Africa buys products from Ghana, and that must continue. But the sooner we can switch on the legal start of trade, in other words, to have all these modalities in place, the sooner our respective companies will get a trade preference. And why that is important is that will make Ghanaian products cheaper compared to products that are made in Asia, Europe, or the Americas on a like-for-like basis. So the tax applicable to that product, what we call the tariff, would be reduced progressively over a number of years until it gets to zero. And when we eventually get to zero, it would mean you'd have achieved your full free trade benefit. And it's really providing an additional benefit to a product that is made on the African continent by a member state who have complied with all the modalities of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So I hope that that also contextualizes a little bit the approach that we take as trade ministers on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I saw a hand. Colleague, unfortunately, yes, please stand. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alfred Okanse. I work with TV3. So I see that the focus over the period has been on the development of the rules of origin for this product, which is good. But how about the non-tariff barriers as well? Because even if the rules of origin are in place for these 88% of the products we're talking about, and for instance, we don't have a single air market in this space, I'm talking about the market on the continent, is still going to prove as a challenge. Because if we are having free movement, which is critical to this AfCFTA's success, not being addressed, and that, for instance, SMEs would have to go through so many other countries to get to one African country to still trade. If that is not addressed, I think that would also be hitting us now going forward. So what are the measures in place to address the specific issue of a single air African market to augment the process of the implementation of the AfCFTA? Thank you.
Thanks, Alfred. Another colleague? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. The name is Justice. I work for the Shenhua News Agency. My issue is about trade financing, because we know on the continent we want to promote SMEs, smallholder businesses, etc., to be able to grow. But one of the things that we found on the ground when we spoke to traders here in Ghana, SMEs, financing has been their major challenge. So as we are trying to put in the legal regime, regulatory regime, what are we doing to ensure that our SMEs are properly financed to be able to take advantage of the free trade area? Thank you.
Thanks, Justice. Any other hand? Yes, sir, in the blue shirt.
My name is Issa Mohammed with the Ghana News Agency. I would like to find out what did the magic at the meeting to make the ministers move from their initial position to agree on what we have today. Yeah. And then also there is a strategy that has been developed by AfCFTA as far as inclusion of women and youth are concerned, a private sector engagement strategy. I would like to find out how far with it in terms of implementation. Yeah. And then what are we left with? The rule of origin negotiations. Are we done with it, or there are some more negotiations to be done? Yep.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. His Excellency and Minister. Maybe let me start with the Minister first.
Well, first, thank you very much. You know, the Secretary General is obviously the expert on this, so I was hoping you'd give the expert the floor first. But just on the questions that were asked, I start first with Alfred's question on the non-tariff barriers. So I would say, Alfred, that there are a number of things that we need in order for trade to be smooth, to be significant in volume, and to be increasingly value addition. It took Europe something like 50 years of work for them to put their modalities in place. They started at the end of the Second World War with the coal and steel agreement that was the first attempt at creating a basis for a common market. Eventually, they had later on the broader agreements. It was the European Community, and later on it became the European Union. Now, we've looked carefully at the experience across the world. We've looked at NAFTA, which of course is quite an important agreement of 3 countries in North America. We've looked at the European experience, but also the experience of Asian countries, and critically, the experience we have on the African continent, because we have a series of regional economic communities. And the first thing that you need to do is to get your trade regime in place. Tick that box now. But it's what we call a necessary condition. It will help to promote more trade, but it's not a sufficient condition if you're really ambitious about how much trade you want. If you're prepared to settle for a small increase, it's sufficient. But if you want to do what we need to do on the African continent, you need more than only the trade regime. So the second thing you need is infrastructure. And infrastructure is critically what we call transport logistics. Transport logistics include the air links that Alfred spoke about, but also rail links and road links, and improvement in the ports of entry for marine traffic shipping, because a very big volume of goods are carried by rail, truck, and ship. And so complementing the work that we're doing are the NIPAD initiatives, the new Partnership for African Development that is working on strengthening the infrastructure linkages. And I'm sure Secretary General is going to talk about the east-west and perhaps the north-south corridors that are being developed in partnership with the Secretariat and by the African Union. An element of that is to make it easier for African airlines to get landing slots and air links. And of course, all of them ultimately need volume. They need traffic. The fact that I am now traveling from Johannesburg to Accra helps to create a more viable route for airlines here. When we didn't travel as regularly between ourselves, it meant I needed to fly very often to London and then from London to Accra. So as the African middle class increases in size, people travel between countries, business people find new opportunities, you create a market, and that market sustains more air links between ourselves. And so, Alfred, you've hit the nail on the head that if you don't have these kind of infrastructure facilities, you don't realize the full value of your free trade area. I will add to the air links because your big volume products can't really move by freight. It's too expensive, air freight. So you need rail. Rail is critical. And road linkages is vital. You look at the successes of both North America and Europe and even many parts of Asia. It's the strength of their logistics systems that give them the edge. But if we address transport logistics, it's not sufficient. There are other infrastructure challenges. Countries need reliable energy supply, because if we are, one statistic we gave yesterday, and it's a telling statistic, Africa has 17% of the world's population, but produces only 1% of the world's steel. And steel is the bedrock of industrialization. But to build a steel industry, you need available energy and you need affordable energy. So your energy systems are the next big project that we need to work on as the African Union. So it won't be the task of the AfCFTA Secretariat. It's the common job that heads of state now tackle across the continent. And you can see as I go through all the lists, how ambitious the agenda of African integration needs to be. If you only tackle it on one front, you only get a small rise. And Africa only trades about 18% of its total trade is with each other. In Europe, it's over 70%. In Asia, it's about 60%. So there's an enormous opportunity for us to deepen trade. Besides the infrastructure areas that I've covered, and by the way, ICT, your broadband, your fiber optic cables, your undersea cabling, all of those play a very important role in the age, the information intensive age we are. So that's infrastructure. Then you've got to align your rules. You've got to make sure that countries' health and safety rules on products and so on are aligned to each other, that a country can't invoke a health standard in a willy-nilly manner to frustrate someone else from exporting to them. And so we have now in the AfCFTA dispute settlement body that we're creating that would enable a country or a firm who feels that someone is using an unfair trade barrier to frustrate trade. They can go to the dispute settlement body and that dispute can then be considered there. So yesterday, a big part of the report that the Secretary General had worked on and that the chair of the dispute settlement body negotiations had tabled dealt precisely with how do you resolve disputes with each other. And then finally, you need investment. And so yesterday, again, the SG took the initiative of bringing both private sector investors to meet with trade ministers. We met with the auto sector. We had some of the large players there, for example, Bosch, who do the components for cars, had a very senior executive there. And they're the world's biggest component maker and component investor. And so they're looking now for opportunities to make more components on the African continent. We had a significant food producer who has operations across the continent who addressed us yesterday. They're a big investor. And so investment is another driver. The question then ultimately is, where does that investment go to? Does it only go to opportunities for large businesses, or do we bring women entrepreneurs and young people in? And I'm sure Secretary General would want to talk about the project that he and his team is putting together on all of this. I want to for a moment though say that the heavy lifting to address all these issues is not only that of the African Union and the AfCFTA. It's also at country level that we need, as member states, we need to put in place a conducive environment to bring young people and women into our investment strategies, to provide financial incentives. And yes, the Secretariat is exploring partnerships at the continental level, but we as countries also have a role to find ways of incentivizing young people and women, and not as an act of charity. It's an act of profound commercial rationale. In other words, Africa's young people not only need opportunities, but Africa needs to give them opportunities because they will drive the products of the future. You look at the American economy, it's been transformed by the innovation that young people brought to the digital economy, a growing part of the US. Now, I look at the young Africans, there's a flair for design, for fashion, for applications in social media. You see it springing up. We need to find ways in which that become commercially driven, that it's not only things that people do on social media, but they bring that entrepreneurial energy into something that can make commercially viable products that enter markets that people will pay for, the advertisers will pay for. So part of it, of what we need to do is, as countries, is to put these systems in place that that Alfred and Justice have spoken to. Finally, Issa Mohammed, I think I've not sure if I got the first name right, but Mr. Mohammed asked what shifted. And of course, yesterday's meeting was preceded by meetings of officials drawn from all the participating countries and supported by the Secretariat. And we had given them a hard task when we met last year. Was it in October that we had the meeting, Secretary General? Yeah, 8th of October, here in Accra. And the Secretary General had called me and said, we need to have this meeting, and Minister, I recommend that it be a meeting in person so we can make a breakthrough. And so even though we still needed to deal with the COVID challenges and so on, trade ministers flew to Accra in October last year, and we sat down and we provided the framework that helped many of the products to be resolved. So it is political will to ensure that these matters get addressed. There are still a few categories that are left, some smaller ones, parts of sugar where we don't have all the rules of origin agreed. tobacco products or certain tobacco products, and then two larger ones, and that is automobiles and clothing and textiles. So we had very valuable discussions yesterday that provides guidance now to the negotiators, the officials from the different countries, to now get on with a program of work over the next number of months to try to bed those down. But even though those are not resolved yet, if you look at what has been resolved, that's a package of 88% of all the products that countries produce and trade with each other. And that package is what is now the basis for us to say confidently we can commence, we can now actually get to the switching on of trade. We couldn't do that before because we had only 72% of products agreed by the time in 2019 when the heads of state had said we must now work on the implementation phase. We've moved it from 72% of products to 88% of products. That's an additional 850, just over 850 products where rules of origin have been agreed. I'm not going to take you through all of them, but they're from cheeses to fruit juices to certain kinds of sugar and edible oils products. There's certain machinery that we've agreed to. It's many different products, even fish products. There's a very nice fish that comes from my hometown in South Africa. It's called snook, and it's a very unique fish. And I hope we can sell much of that fish in Ghana, and that we can buy fish that have been caught in the waters of Ghana that we as South Africans can also enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I will be brief because most of the answers have been provided by the Honourable Minister. The single African air transport market, as Alfred was suggesting, is very, very important. Unfortunately, it has been signed by only about 30 countries so far. More has to be done to make sure that it is a universally accepted agreement in Africa. Of course, one of its main objectives is to build on the liberalization under the Yamoussoukro Agreement, and we now know that there is scope for further liberalization of our skies to enable the connectivity that we want to see, which will itself create more opportunities for trade and business. And so we have to work closely with there is obviously a direct correlation between transport, air transport and trade, movement of goods, movement of business persons. So we have to work very closely with our colleagues, the airline industry, ministers of transport, to make sure that this agreement is signed by more countries and implemented by more countries to boost intra-Africa trade. The question on financing of small medium enterprises, if we don't have large numbers of small medium enterprises being part of the implementation and the benefits of this agreement, then I'm afraid we are not going to have an agreement that is fully inclusive in development benefits. Only the large corporations will benefit. So that's why we have to take very concrete steps to make sure that there is financing available for small medium enterprises, particularly those that are led by women, and as well as young entrepreneurs. So we are in discussions. In fact, in just last week on Wednesday, we had a very, very good discussion with African Development Bank about what kind of financing facilities can be provided by our development finance institutions on the continent whether it's African Development Bank, AfrEximBank, or any other development finance institution, we don't have the capital, obviously. So the only thing we can do is to encourage and put soft pressure and kind pressure on development finance institutions to make capital available for those who want to trade under the AfCFTA. The practical steps that we can take to enable trade for small medium enterprises, in particular, and young entrepreneurs, we in the next few months will launch the Africa Trade Gateway, which we are working on with AfrEximBank. It will have a range of different information for a small medium enterprise. It will have market information about if you are in West Africa, about the market in Kenya. It will have information about your counterparty that you will want to trade with. There will be due diligence information. So it will be a tool for business connectivity for small medium enterprises. There will also be there embedded in it, the Pan-African payments and settlement system. And we have integrated this tool to make sure that small medium enterprises can easily access the AfCFTA, apart from financing, which is very, very important. On the financing, I'm hoping that in the next few months, we will be in a position to make an announcement about the discussion that we're having with the African Development Bank and AfrEximBank on this important question of financing. Regarding women, the program on women and youth in trade, we have started the work to develop a protocol on women and youth in trade. The protocol will set very clearly, in very clear terms, the opportunities that should be legally embedded, legally anchored, codified for women and youth to benefit from this agreement. We have, of course, various youth formations across the continent that we work with all the time. For example, last year here in Accra, as you will recall, there was a youth summit. We participated in that summit in developing further thought, further thinking about how young people can be better organized to leverage and benefit from the AfCFTA, ranging from things like identifying value chains that they can participate in. As the Honorable Minister said earlier, you go around the continent, whether it is in Lagos, in Kigali, in Nairobi, you will find young people that are on the cutting edge of digital innovations. And so we want to find a way of creating a space for them to be part of the benefits of this agreement. I think those were all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. Colleagues, I think that's it. I know we've got some journalists who've joined us online, but I'm told by my colleagues that no question has come through as yet. So I guess it's a Saturday, they're just taking notes, and they will write the best articles ever after digesting all they've learned today. But in the meantime, I think that's it, unless I see one last hand, hopefully a lady. Oh, just before I give another gentleman, is there any lady that I could? Okay, my boss says they're shy. Yeah. All right. Yes, my dear brother, that's the last question for the day, colleagues. And yeah, please come through. While he's coming through, please note that on your way, there will be a folder that has the press statement, the profile of the minister, and the profile of His Excellency. We're making sure that you know them very well. You are not going to give them any accolades they don't have or they've never been given, but you strictly adhere to what they have declared in their profiles. Thank you, colleagues.
So one feedback some of us picked from some stakeholders is how we are positioning already existing international agreements that we have with partners outside. For instance, some countries are still signing the EPAs. There's been the AGOA. Also, then there is the Belt and Road Initiative by China. So how are we going to position AfCFTA to reap maximum benefits and perhaps levers from these international agreements that already exist on the continent, so that we have a win-win situation which does not actually affect, what we envisage AfCFTA to do for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred, for that question. I think the underlying point that you make is absolutely critical. And that is that as we implement this agreement, as we consolidate integration in Africa, we have to make sure that the priority is, as much as there are bilateral relations that countries have, but the priority is the AfCFTA. I will answer your question in two ways. One is a technical legal answer, and that is that in the agreement, we do make provision for pre-existing trade agreements, as well as with third parties, as we call them, as well as future trade agreements with third parties outside of the AfCFTA market or outside of the African continent. And these third country agreements are permissible subject to certain conditions that have to be met. For example, if you are country X and you have ratified the AfCFTA, you want to negotiate with a European country, you have a duty to provide the same preferences or better to the AfCFTA country. This is the legal position as it stands. So countries are legally permissible to negotiate with a third country, any third country that they wish, because this is an issue of sovereignty. You cannot stop a country from negotiating with whomever it wishes to. There is also a political economy consideration, and that is that if Africa is to advance rapidly in integrating, then we have to prioritize the AfCFTA. The challenges that the Honorable Minister set out will be there. We know that. We know, as the Minister said, we know from the experience of the European Union how difficult it is. And we know from the experience of the European Union that they remain very, very focused on the project of integration in Europe. The heads of states have recognized this point of the importance of integration on our continent, and they have said there is no country that can be stopped from negotiating with others outside of the continent. However, priority must be to consolidate the AfCFTA, where there are outstanding negotiations, to conclude those outstanding negotiations, and to move together as a unit. Where there are existing agreements or future agreements, they must not undermine the objectives of the AfCFTA. They must not undermine the objectives of integration in Africa. And in fact, what the heads of states even went on further to say in their decision in Niamey in Nouakchott in 2018, July, is that if you negotiate with a third country, there must be a commitment to supporting regional integration, economic integration on the African continent. So that would be my response to Alfred. Thank you.
Minister, please.
I think the Secretary General has put it really very, very well. Our priority is the AfCFTA. Africa needs to trade more with each other. Yes, Africa wants to trade too and needs to trade with the rest of the world, but our most significant gap that we're seeking to address is the low level of trade between and among African countries. We go back to that number. 18% of all the trade we do as African countries are with each other. 18%. More than 70% of all the trade by Europeans are with other European countries. And therein lies the opportunity for the continent to deepen its trade relations with each other, because when you trade more with each other and you create these large markets, you give the opportunity for factories and massive workplaces to be created here on the continent, creating jobs for young Africans. That's what the objective is that we're seeking to pursue now. I think the rest of the elements of it, the Secretary General has outlined very, very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, His Excellency. May I take this opportunity again to thank you, the Minister and His Excellency, but let me also just acknowledge the colleagues who are sitting here, the executive and the leadership of the Secretariat, starting from the Chief of Staff himself, who's leading this pack. Thank you very much. And I'm saying this because there might be follow-up, and I know His Excellency and the ministers don't have time. There might be some questions that you want clarity on, and I'm sure the colleagues could also unpack. But Minister, you talked about snook fish. In Ghana, there is tilapia. I hope you will taste some before you leave. It is the best fish thus far. I would like to see it being exported to South Africa.
I'm going to have to try some tilapia this afternoon.
On that note, ladies and
You
gentlemen.
try it with Banku, Honorable Minister. Yeah, tilapia with Banku. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please pick up your folders on your way out and make sure that you're in the database list. Thank you.
Working with the Afrexim Bank, the AfCFTA Secretariat launched the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, which we believe will be a game changer for boosting intra-Africa trade and for inclusion of small medium enterprises on economic activity on the African continent. We know the challenges that we all face with the cost of currency convertibility on the African continent. Today, if you are in Ghana and you want to trade with somebody in Kenya, you have to convert the Ghanaian cedi into the dollar. They receive the dollar, and then they have to convert the dollar into the Kenyan shilling. All of this costs money. It costs Africa about $5 billion a year to convert currency to be able to trade. And so the AfCFTA Secretariat and Afrexim Bank have designed and created this payments and settlement system to ensure that trade in Africa is affordable, is cost-effective, is accessible, and more importantly, to ensure that our small medium enterprises, our young entrepreneurs, that they enjoy the benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
We launched the commercial operation of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. We cannot talk of a free trade agreement for the region targeted at promoting intra-regional trade and investments without having an integrated payment infrastructure for the continent. And that's what we've created, working together with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the African Union. We have also delivered on a transit guarantee scheme. We're working together to use digital platforms to integrate the SMEs and women into trade. These are just within 3 years of this agreement being signed. It is moving at lightning speed. Thank you, our leaders, for taking the bull by the horn. Thank you, our leaders, for having the courage to concretize a vision. Thank you, our leaders, for bringing Kwame Nkrumah's dream of our taking our destiny in our own hands to reality. We, as institutions that have been created, AfCFTA Bank, the AfCFTA Secretariat, will do everything in our power to make sure that all stones that need to be turned are turned, so that we will bring confidence to our people and deliver this instrument that we need to achieve the African Union's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want.
This Pan-African payment and settlement system is going to allow a customer, a buyer, to make payment in the national currency, and the seller will receive the payment in his or her own national currency as well. Let's take example, if you are buying something and you are from Kenya and the seller is from Ghana, a Kenyan using Kenyan shilling will be able to pay the product in Kenyan shilling, and the seller who is in Ghana will be able to receive the payment in Ghana cedi with little cost than transacting in changing Kenyan shilling to US dollar and then converting US dollar to Ghana shilling. The advantage number two is that most of African cross-border trade is not recorded. That's why you hear about informal cross-border trade in Africa, which account for close to 60%. So with this payment system that will be put in place, it will be much easier for government institutions to record statistics of trade that is happening. These PAPs will play that role, trade facilitation, reducing the cost of doing business, but also contributing to statistics for the continent.
PAP's doors are open and that we're ready to actually scale the solution beyond just the West African Monetary Zone, where we've done a pilot, but beyond to the length and breadth of Africa. We are now opening our doors and we're inviting all the central banks across Africa to come and connect and participate in this platform that we believe will transform trade on the continent. The launch was to tell the whole world that PAPS is live and that they can indeed connect onto the platform. By so doing, we're able to extend this service down to the small traders in the remote areas, to the small business people, to the individuals who need to send money across borders.
The spirit, the energy, the quality of intervention show that we are onto something that is transformative. The AfCFTA has come to stay. There is no going back. I know there may be some cynicism out there about whether it is implementation, but we're going to get there. The partnership that we ourselves enjoy, the AfCFTA and the AfCFTA Bank, and all the, interested development agencies, Pan-African agencies, suggest that, there's no going back. It is here to stay. And that when we come to Agenda 2063, history will bear witness to that.
For me, the issues of the payment system, that is the PAPS payment system, is very useful because it will be part of the implementation process in the area of financial services. So we will look at it from the point of view of ensuring that under trading services, then trade is made easier because payments, let's say if you're a consultant in South Africa working with a company in the Gambia, then you are able to get even your payments done very easily. So that for us under trading services is very, very important. Then if I look at it from the element of digital trade, it is also developed using e-commerce, and it will also be useful to ensure that we are able to make the payments across much easier. And maybe just to mention that during this period of COVID-19 or the pandemic that we are facing now, where we do not want to have hard currencies being passed along between trading partners, then it is much easier than to make the payments using the PAPS system.
Since day one of negotiating the AfCFTA, we try to provide holistic approach to address the low level of intra-Africa trade. Among other factors, the cost of trade finance and the access to the means of finance have very significant negative impact on the level of intra-Africa trade. While the current protocol of trading goods aims to eliminate and reduce tariff and non-tariff barriers, the Pan-African payment system, which is being developed in collaboration with Afreximbank, will facilitate payments and will complement those efforts by providing an alternative to the current high cost and lengthy correspondent banking relationships. I believe that PAPS and similar initiatives are what makes the AfCFTA different and not just another trade agreement in our beloved continent.